My name is Chris Cobetto, and I have been the director of HyperFest for 23 years. I have always loved cars, and one I loved the most was a 1995 Daytona Violet M3 I owned in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, I let it go too early, and it's taken me 17 years and a 3,200-mile trip from Laguna Seca to Virginia to get it back. Now, every car lover has a story about the one they should have never sold or the one that got away. Here are some of those stories from some of my good friends that kept us company on our trip back.
Hey, by the way, you just drove your dream car, right? Didn't you just drive the McLaren?
I don't know what a dream car would be, but one of the cars that I've always wanted to drive, I will be driving next month. It's the McLaren F1. I haven't driven it yet, but that is one that I would like to drive. I mean, I used to have this inventor buddy that I worked for before I got into racing. He invented amusement rides, and I was basically like a guinea pig. And it was, he would buy cars, and he went through that whole Ferrari thing, like where Ferraris were worth more once you drove them off the lot than when you bought them, just because the dealerships weren't allowed. After the F50, the dealerships weren't allowed to mark up Ferraris. So what they would do is they would do a deal with somebody, and this still happens now. They would do a deal with somebody and say, hey, you can buy this new 355 or 360 or whatever it was, and but you have to agree to sell it back to us a year from now for $10,000 more than you paid for it, and it needs to have less than 2,500 miles on it. And by the way, that if you do that, that'll put you on the list to do the same deal with the next one, which is the Spider version. And then comes the 430 and then the 430 Spider. And he did that for 6 years. Anyway, I tried to convince him after that to get a McLaren F1, which I think they were about 1.2 or 1.3 million, which was, astronomical money for a car. It still is crazy money. But back then, people didn't see cars as investments. Now they're 20 million. 20 million.
Good God.
Yeah. And there were a bunch of them for sale back then, and that wasn't that long ago. But it just shows you, sometimes I think people really see the car world, especially like that E36 and the E46 that I let go for hardly any money. People really see those things as kind of investments more rather than just liabilities like cars have always been in the past.
So the E46 that you had, is that the one that you kind of wish you still had?
I mean, I'm not a big buyer and seller of cars, so I don't really have one that I'm like constantly pining over that I missed out on. But certainly that was one that every time I drove it, I was like, I can't sell this car. This thing's awesome. And where I bought it was from a guy named Stefan Papadakis, who was a car and engine builder. He was a drag racer at the time, and he was the team owner for the drift team, Papadakis Racing, and that I ran for a number of years. So I bought that car from him. He had sworn it had never been on the track before. It had 10,000 miles on it. I drove it to over 100,000 miles and then sold it, I think, for $16,000. I think they're worth more than double that now. But more importantly, the car was just really nice to drive. It's one of those things. It's like like I said, every time I got in it, it was like, I don't know if I need anything more. It's fast enough. It's quiet. I mean, it was the quietest car I'd ever had at 90 miles an hour, I think. And like, what speed are you going right now?
We don't really know. It depends upon when the dash decides to work. It's currently working. At the moment, it wasn't. And then you asked a question and it started working. So indicated 55. However, our GPS is saying that we're 65 to 68.
Now we're going zero.
Now we're going zero.
It's just a quiet car. I know there's a lot of differences between, I think the E46 is a little bit more older man, grown up version, and E36 was a little lighter and more nimble. But yeah, it was a good machine. I mean, I sold it, like I said, for $16,000, which now that I have an actual place to park cars, doesn't seem like nearly enough.
So now, were you just like a car nut ever since you can remember, like being a kid?
I mean, for me, I was always into cars, not racing. That makes sense. Like I remember. So here, I'll take you on a quick little walk here. I remember a turn in a 912 Porsche that I still have, that we're walking to now, that my dad made from Colorado Boulevard to Hamden in Denver when I was 5 years old. And I've paid attention to every single car, every shift, every noise from a car ever since. So here's this 912.
Nice.
Yeah, it sits. It's in the second floor of my house. Actually, it turned into a shrine. It wasn't originally supposed to be like that, but value of certain cars is more like sentimental rather than, monetary. So that's ever since that moment in that car, really obsessed over cars to the point where I got a career driving them just because I was so obsessive about it. I think I could have been a magazine editor or an engineer like I originally studied to be, but it would have been involving cars no matter what. That's just the passion that I had.
What's the Tanner Foust Spotify secret driving mix?
I love 80s music.